Chapter 9 of the Life and Adventures of Nat Love, also known as Deadwood Dick. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Adventures of Nat Love, written by Nat Love. Chapter 9. En route to Wyoming. The Indians demand toll. The fight. A buffalo stampede. Tragic death of Cal Searcy. An eventful trip. After getting the cattle together down on the Rio Grande, and both man and beast had got somewhat rested up, we started the herd north. They were to be delivered to a man by the name of Mitchell, whose ranch was located along the Powder River up in northern Wyoming. It was a long distance to drive cattle from Old Mexico to northern Wyoming, but to us it was nothing extraordinary, as we were often called on to make even greater distances, as the railroads were not so common then as now, and transportation by rail was very little resorted to, and except when beef cattle were sent to the Far East, they were always transported on the hoof overland. Our route lay through southern Texas, Indian Territory, Kansas, and Nebraska, to the Shoshone Mountains in northern Wyoming. We had on this trip 500 head of mostly 4-year-old longhorn steers. We did not have much trouble with them until we struck Indian Territory. On nearing the first Indian reservation, we were stopped by a large body of Indian bucks, who said we could not pass through their country unless we gave them a steer for the privilege. Now, as we were following the regular government trail, which was a free public highway, it did not strike us as justifiable to pay our way. Accordingly, our boss flatly refused to give the Indians a steer, remarking that we needed all the cattle we had, and proposed to keep them; but he would not mind giving them something much warmer if they interfered with us. This ultimatum of our boss had the effect of starting trouble right there. We went into camp at the edge of the Indian country. All around us was the tall blue grass of that region, which in places was higher than a horse, affording an ideal hiding place for the Indians. As we expected an attack from the Indians, the boss arranged strong watches to keep a keen look out. We had no sooner finished making camp when the Indians showed up and charged us with a yell, or rather a series of yells. I for one had got well used to the blood-curdling yells of the Indians, and they did not scare us in the least. We were all ready for them, and after a short but sharp fight the Indians withdrew, and everything became quiet, but us cowboys were not such guys as to be fooled by the seeming quietness. We knew it was only the calm before the storm, and we prepared ourselves accordingly. But we were all dead tired, and it was necessary that we secure as much rest as possible, so the low watch turned in to rest until midnight, when they were to relieve the upper watch, in whose hands the safety of the camp was placed till that time. Every man slept with his boots on and his gun near his hand. We had been sleeping several hours, but it seemed to me only a few minutes when the danger signal was given. Immediately every man was on his feet, gun in hand, and ready for business. The Indians had secured reinforcements, and after dividing in two bands, one band hid in the tall grass in order to pick us off, and shoot us as we attempted to hold our cattle, while the other band proceeded to stampede the herd; but fortunately there were enough of us to prevent the herd from stringing out on us. As we gave our first attention to the cattle, we got them to merling. Back and forward through the tall grass the large herd charged, the Indians being kept too busy keeping out of their way to have much time to bother with us. This kept up until daylight, but long before that time we came to the conclusion that this was the worst herd of cattle to stampede we ever struck. They seemed perfectly crazy, even after the last Indian had disappeared. We were unable to account for the strange actions of the cattle until daylight, when the mystery was a mystery no longer. The Indians, in large numbers, had hidden the tall grass for the purpose of shooting us from ambush, and being on foot, they were unable to get out of the way of the herd as it stampeded through the grass. The result was that scores of the painted savages were trampled under the hoofs of the maddened cattle, and in the early grey dawn of the approaching day we witnessed a horrible sight. The Indians were all cut to pieces, their heads, limbs, trunk, and blankets all being ground up in an inseparable mass, as if they had been through a sausage machine. The sight was all the more horrible, as we did not know the Indians were hidden in the grass during the night, but their presence there accounted for the strange actions of the herd during the night. We suffered no loss or damage, except the loss of our rest, which we sorely needed, as we were all pretty well played out. However, we thought it advisable to move our herd on to a more desirable and safe camping place. Not that we greatly feared any more trouble from the Indians, not soon at any rate, but only to be better prepared and in better shape to put up a fight if attacked. The second night we camped on the open plain, where the grass was not so high, and where the camp could be better guarded. After eating our supper and placing the usual watch, the men again turned in, expecting this time to get a good night's rest. It was my turn to take the first watch, and with the other boys, who were to watch with me, we took up advantageous positions on the look out. Everything soon became still. The night was dark and sultry. It was getting along toward midnight, when all at once we became aware of a roaring noise in the north like thunder, slowly growing louder as it approached, and I said to the boys that it must be a buffalo stampede. We immediately gave the alarm, and started for our herd to get them out of the way of the buffalo; but we soon found that, despite our utmost efforts, we would be unable to get them out of the way, so we came to the conclusion to meet them with our guns, and try to turn the buffalo from our direction if possible, and prevent them from going through our herd. Accordingly, all hands rode to meet the oncoming stampede, pouring volley after volley into the almost solid mass of rushing beasts, but they paid no more attention to us than they would have paid to a lot of boys with pea shooters. On they came, a maddened, plunging, snorting, bellowing mass of horns and hoofs. One of our companions, a young fellow by the name of who was riding a young horse, here began to have trouble in controlling his mount, and before any of us could reach him his horse bolted right in front of the herd of buffalo, and in a trice the horse and rider went down, and the whole herd passed over them. After the herd had passed, we could only find a few scraps of poor Cal's clothing, and the horse he had been riding was reduced to the size of a jack-rabbit. The buffalo went through our herd, killing 5 head and crippling many others, and scattering them all over the plain. This was the year that the great buffalo slaughter commenced, and such stampedes were common then. It seemed to me that as soon as we got out of one trouble we got into another on this trip, but we did not get discouraged, but only wondered what would happen next. We did not much care for ourselves, as we were always ready, and in most cases anxious for a brush with the Indians, or for the other dangers of the trail, as they only went to relieve the dull monotony of life behind the herd. But these cattle were entrusted to our care, and every one represented money, good hard cash, so we did not relish in the least having them stampeded by the Indians or run over by the buffaloes. If casualties kept up at this rate, there would not be very many cattle to deliver in Wyoming by the time we got there. After the buffalo stampede, we rounded up our scattered herd, and went into camp for a couple of days' rest before proceeding on our journey north. The tragic death of Cal Searcy had a very depressing effect on all of us, as he was a boy well liked by us all, and it was hard to think that we could not even give him a Christian burial. We left his remains trampled into the dust of the prairie, and his fate caused even the most hardened of us to shudder as we contemplated it. After getting fairly rested, we proceeded on our journey north, and were soon out of the Indian territory, though we often met small bands of roving bucks, but aside from exchanging a few shots at each other, they caused us no trouble. We crossed Kansas and Nebraska, and reached the end of our long journey without further incident worthy of note, and we delivered our herd only 5 head short, which was not bad considering the distance we had travelled and the events that had happened. It was a wonder that we had been able to get through with half of our herd or men. Consequently, it was with genuine relief that we turned the cattle over to their new owners, and received our receipt therefor. We remained at the Mitchell Ranch in Wyoming several days, fraternising with our northern brothers, swapping yarns, and having a good time generally. On the return journey to Arizona we were, of course, able to make better time, and we returned more direct by way of Colorado and Utah, taking note of the cattle trails in the country over which we passed. In that way we secured valuable information of the trails in the country that stood us in good stead in future trips north. Arriving home at the Pete Gallagher ranch in Arizona, we became the heroes of the range, and we received unstinted praise from our boss,